Welcome to Dark Matters, episode 7, the last episode in the first of the series. And to finish the series off in style, we are more than honoured to have the super loquacious orator and interdimensional pioneer, Sacha Stone, alongside being one of the most mellifluous public speakers I've ever had the fortune of tuning into. Sacha is a filmmaker, poet, and activist, exposing the Sabbatean trickery, lies, and deceit that promote hijacked frequency to indentured fictions, intent on replacing apocalyptic mindsets with that of a true and organic sentient paradigm of a new Earth. Head of the New Earth Horizon, the World Health Sovereignty Summit, the Lazarus Initiative, Humanitad, and the International Tribunal for Natural Justice, to name but a few, he embodies the old adage that all it takes for evil to thrive is for good men to say and do nothing. We are starting to wonder if and when he ever sleeps. Sacha, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule and joining us here today.
Very happy to see you. I'm in the sunny Riviera, Mayan Riviera in Mexico. Always happy to be connecting to my brethren on the other side of the big water.
Yeah, it seems that everybody with any kind of sense seems to be going out to Mexico. Is that because I think I heard you say in one of your interviews that that's where the kind of energy grid is kind of very strong at the moment. Is that why kind of people seem to be going out there at the moment?
I don't know what other people's rationale is, but to be sure, the Mexican government were pretty unrestricted and unconstricted during the last couple of years of the COVID bullshit. So that helped. The government has been kind of somewhat progressive in looking to, have a closer dialogue with the BRICS nations and making the right kind of overtures about getting outside of central banking indentureship. So for that reason, it's kind of from the practical level, it's a sensible place. It's a good place for investment. And it's an amazing place to be located in terms of climate and so on. And my personal reason is that, yeah, it's connected to prophecy as I relate to it and understand it. So for a whole phalanx of reasons, I decided to make Mexico the new ground zero for the new Earth, the greater project, which I've been working toward for many, many years. And, 2012, 13, I was here. And at that time, I sensed the energy shift already, and I felt very, very connected to it. But it was once I got to Laguna Bacalar here, closer to Belize, that I was absolutely certain in my own mind. The year before last, when I first came here, and then last year I began the foray into understanding the metric of dealing with central government and municipal government and the landing, the titling and zoning and permitting and all that bureaucratic shit show, which we're very much involved in and sitting on top of now. So we've also got our trust vehicle up and running, and we've got a hell of a lot of people, pretty emancipated people, I have to say, coming through the doors, which I'm very happy about. But I haven't even formally launched the project properly, and that's going to happen in February next year in Los Angeles, when I'm coming out with the sort of full spectrum of the initiative, which is huge, I have to say, very, very big.
Awesome. Yeah, so you mentioned origins and prophecy, and I'm hoping to kind of get onto that with you a little bit. I mean, it's obviously a huge topic, and we don't have all day, as much as I could spend all day talking to you, no doubt. So yeah, there's so much we could kind of discuss with you today amidst the huge backdrop and body of work that you do and have done. But to give it a thread, I guess it would be great to focus on what the channel focuses on, I thought, which is kind of decoding this Anunnaki Babylonian construct, the legal fiction, etymology, its language, and their language definitely being the monsters of war, their alphabets, their counting systems, all false prophets in the minds of men, as I say, and this cult of hoops that they've got us constantly, jumping through. So as we know, it's kind of it's all about frequency. And when did you kind of first become aware of the deception of language and legalese and the legal fiction and its kind of inherent trickery?
So I have to say at the beginning of this conversation that you're dealing with somebody who is far more spiritualized and, in a sense, alchemized about the dialectic, about the them and us stuff. So I'm in a very philosophical disposition as it relates to them and us and the establishment, the Draconian, Babylonian, Sabbatean, Syrian, Orion, like in, Khazarian gig. all of that stuff is great, and I've exercised a lot of mental gymnastics, intellectual gymnastics in exploring that dimension of thought in the last, certainly the last 20 years. But I've come now to a point which is very spiritualized, which is to say, I look at things now as being absolutely perfect, always in all ways. That's my start point. And the start point is always right here, right now. It's never, oh, at the end of this interview or next Tuesday or when I'm on a plane to the Bahamas or, when I finally get my redemption and the check comes in the post. None of that stuff matters. It's really all about entraining one's aspect or one's view of the world into the here and now. So I can speak a great deal to the fiction of reality as it relates to my own story. I grew up in a war and looking at the world through barbed wire and high security security fences and floodlights and all of that stuff in the middle of a bush war in Africa in the 1970s into the 80s. And then I was a refugee for about 9 years without status, and then ran underground for a little bit. I mean, I've never really talked about that stuff, but at some point I probably will. I think next year will be the right year for me to talk a little bit about that stuff. And I, was in rock and roll for a while, kind of fuck you to the establishment, playing that archetypal role, which morphed into kind of a sort of shock poet, but somebody who also understood, increasingly understood how diabolical the fiction was. For me, the point at which I flipped, and I think that's really your question, the point at which I flipped was one fine day when I had gone away on holiday in England, and I'd gone away for a couple of weeks, come back and discovered that my vehicle, which was a new vehicle that I'd really saved up to get, and I had it on a payment schedule, so I didn't even own the fucking thing. But my vehicle had been clamped and towed away from outside my house because I had turned the tire in to prevent it from rolling down a hill. You do that smartly. You turn it in, the tire was touching. So in case the handbrake broke or something, that the car would wedge against the pavement and not run down the hill. And I had done that as a sort of steering lock scenario. Now, turns out when I've contacted the police to say my car's been stolen, they said, well, it hasn't been stolen, it's actually at the police pound and it's been there for 2 weeks, and you owe us $1,500 to get it released or some bullshit, and then compounded with these disgusting penalties and interest bearing and all the fucking nonsense they make up. So that thing prevented me from being able to get my car out of the pound, and I lost my vehicle. And I was facing a debt from the car company, and the police were chasing me also for the fine. And that perfect storm of Babylonian witchery or bedevilment was the thing that really got me. And I remember being so outraged at how a completely innocent human, me in that case, that could get caught between the devil and the deep blue sea in the bureaucracy and the sheer wickedness of the organs of so-called governance and so-called justice and so-called, protectionism with the police. Who was protecting who? The police weren't looking out for me, the citizen. The government wasn't looking out for me. No one was looking out for me. Everyone was looking out for the profit or for how they could exploit the situation. So that period of my time, those days around that scenario, I became livid, absolutely outraged. And I remember walking late that night and the following night at 2-3 o'clock in the morning, walking into the street, because here I was again with no vehicle, having a huge debt to the car company, and having no car, and I just was screaming at the heavens. I'd been through so much shit already in my youth and growing up, and here I was, 20 years old or whatever it was, 21, got my first car. Anyway, that was the moment that I just took complete stock of the fact that the whole of life as it was presented to me by the status quo was weaponized against me. And I'd had it my whole life, from the war, being a refugee, all of that. And I was a refugee effectively at that time. So at the end of the day, that sheer injustice leveled against your own person by the entirety of the status quo is the perfect cauldron to fashion sovereignty and a sovereign jurisdiction. Because, of course, the sovereign jurisdiction emerges through clarified thought. Once you're no longer thinking along the tram lines that are programmed for you, which is, have you filled out your tax form yet? Or have you, oh my God, you must go down to the police station and make sure that all of that stuff where you feel compelled to go through the slave gamut and do what you are bid to do by Cronus, by the crown, by the state. Once you break that tram line, and all of a sudden you enter into sovereign jurisdiction of thought, which is hang about. That is wrong. That's right. I am innocent. That's diabolical. I don't want to participate in that jurisdiction. I need to break out of this prison. And the only way I'm going to do it is here. So you start with that, and then eventually, hopefully, that hits the heart as well, and you can again spiritualize the journey, because it's only once you spiritualize the journey of sovereignty and consciousness actuation or actualization that it becomes a blissful and euphoric journey. And ultimately, that's what it is. Freedom, total freedom, complete freedom is euphoria, always, in all ways.
Yeah, no, that's so interesting. I always say the journey of the law for me has been the journey of the spirit. They are intertwined without a shadow of a doubt. Because the more when the pandemic hit this last 4 years, I've been, I don't really like the term awake, because awake is a party for the dead, but aware. And yeah, certainly for me, I think once you kind of stop playing your piece on the cosmic chessboard of that duality reality, and you become the observer of that, and you kind of you detach emotionally, and you do have that spiritual, or that kind of, not higher spiritual as though we're kind of bigger or better than anybody, but you kind of do transcend its games and its play, I suppose. And you touched on Saturn, and we know that the legal system and the Vatican and that cult are huge Saturnian, worshippers of Saturn, and Saturn is Father Time, Kronos, the crown, as you said, and this legal fiction that we all, we all think that we are this piece of paper, and we have to kind of become aware and be able to distinguish the difference. And Saturn is in its positivity puts meat on the bones. It allegedly in astrology we come in through Saturn and we leave through Saturn as the
That's
reaper.
right.
And if we don't kind of work out the game, and I think that the dark is there to show us what we are not, and as you say, it's kind of perfect really. And when you start to understand that, and you start to break down the fictions, and it's know thyself in scripture, I suppose. And I'm very similar to you. I think I've got my tattoos. I was a metal music promoter. I did the rock and roll, and I think you constantly searching. And as you said when you were in the refugee camp, Saturn is suffering. He causes suffrage, because you kind of, not that we kind of want to need that backdrop, but it certainly aids us in alchemizing into those kind of higher frequencies. If you kind of you wrestle with those challenges and win, I guess, if that makes sense.
Indeed. Is there a question there? I mean, I'm happy to agree with that. You've gone through the whole
Yeah,
gamut. Look, all I would add to that is that Saturn indeed is neither good nor ill, and it's not good
yeah,
nor bad. None of these archetypes are Anthony Fauci in the truest expression is neither good nor evil. He's the embodiment of evil in a sense. And in the greater sense, no, he's not. In the greater sense, he's a benediction, because the sheer malevolence that he wrought upon human health and on public health policy is the very thing that is helping us now to unlock and deconstruct government altogether and public health altogether, and to reclaim health sovereignty. So therefore, Bill Gates and Anthony Fauci become the benefactors of our greater unfoldment. And that's how one must always view anything at any time. Saturn, especially, curiously enough, because if you study the geometry of Saturn, you also understand that there's your Merkaba, there's your star tetrahedron, there's your, destruction, anti-destruction geometry. That is just a perfect arbiter, the perfect moderator, the perfect indivisible arbiter of false light reality. And that Saturn just maintains and sustains that frequency, as does Jupiter, as does Pluto, as does, all of these other archetypal bodies in the firmament, in the sky. So yeah, I think moving way beyond all of the objects out there, no matter how big and malevolent they may appear, and bringing everything back here into the still point of the here and now is the essential piece. And if the sooner one can do that, and the sooner one can, again, to use the word for the third time in this few minutes, the alchemization of one's own aspect or perspective on so-called reality into a perfect moment in the here and now, when you recognize that you did steer yourself into this vector of so-called time space, you did incarnate here as party to a soul covenant, a multiplicity of soul covenants in point of fact, and that what you can get on with in this incarnation, in this theater of life, is extraordinary. And then beyond dealing with one's own karma and the elevation of one's own dharma, which is the doing and the goodly work that we do in order to counterpoint bad karma, as we are sojourning or journeying on this wheel of sufferance, this wheel of samsara, as we're doing it, if we truly alchemize one perfect moment in time, actually it becomes joyful, because you can only but start to view every single moment and every day and every new dawn as being a perfect opportunity to elevate art, beauty, consciousness. For me, that's the ABC. And if we all started to focus on the elevation of art, beauty, and consciousness in our own lives, we would all very quickly enjoy a morphogenetic upshift, which is truly the ascension event. And that ultimately is what we're all seeking. We want to get back to the alpha omega state. And you being a qualified lawyer, I don't know if you practice law at all, but you're a qualified lawyer, then you know about justice and you've probably looked into Solomon's judgment as well. And there's a lot of beauty in that, in the subject of law. But natural justice, when you get back to natural justice, that's also a very perplexing subject. Let me ask you this: a little gazelle walking across a shallow lake in the Zambezi in Africa, following its mother, and an alligator tears its leg off, and the creature hops onto shore with 3 legs. Now, this is happening thousands of times every day, millions and millions and millions of times a day. Creatures are having their faces torn off and limbs torn off, and they're being eaten alive, running through the jungle with their entrails hanging out the back in agony by best accounts. So is that natural law? The reason why I'm raising that point is to remind people that what we think of natural law is as heinous, as savage, as cruel as you could possibly imagine. Nature does things to nature that I can't even dream up if I was writing a horror script. So again, the deeper you go into any subject, including natural law, it starts to reveal and reveal and reveal until you recognize, hang about. Even natural law and nature, even those things are idols. Even those things are ideas. They're out there. You need to find a point of serendipity, that still point, which lies beyond the realm of archetypes or the realm of creatures tearing other creatures' faces off. Does that happen on Venus, on Mars? Well, more than likely, if you understand that it's a fractal universe that we inhabit, at least this this quadrant of the universe, at the very least, this galactic field, is a cruel place, or is it? Or is it?
Yeah, and I think you touched on so many points there, and I think it is very important that we kind of know where we have been to kind of know where we're at and where we're going. And although we kind of, it actually points on to a question I was going to ask about meat eating in general, actually later on, and veganism. There's a whole debate going on, and I suppose in the construct we've got to, I kind of think what has hijacked this from it, from the kind of true Edenic template. So have they kind of, there's a theory that perhaps our DNA has been altered so that we kind of crave the taste of blood or meat, and that that in itself is a huge blood sacrifice all the time. And if we're eating meat that you cannot ascend. I mean, I always have this thing with ascension. Where are you ascending to? We kind of, like you said, we do it in the here and now, really, don't we? But if we're kind of eating meat, then we are still in this kind of blood ritual and sacrifice, and that we weren't actually designed that way. Just the same as they've kind of capped. There was these things called the telomere caps, I think, where we would have lived a lot longer than we did, and they've kind of pinpointed that we've been genetically altered and manipulated. So again, I suppose this Saturnian, I wouldn't say it's a trick of matter, but Father Time, or this black box AI cube, or whatever this place is, however we want to describe it. I suppose Laura Eisenhower, when we interviewed her, and she said something that really stuck with me. And she said, "How can we heal from a past when we don't know what it is?" And this is why it's so important for they them to disconnect us from our true history, and this attack on us via transhumanism, virtual reality. This they want us integrated with AI, and this destruction of our antenna and our very DNA via the mRNA subterfuge, shall we say. So I suppose, drawing from your wealth and your direct experience, how would you kind of summarize our origins? I mean, I know we talk a lot about the Anunnaki and these kind of Babylonian overlords, and I think, like I say, that it is this game of duality that we are kind of, we come down through Saturn to play, and we all kind of have our roles, so to speak. But that if we don't know what our true history is, how could we kind of, like I say, heal from it and move forward? What are your thoughts on that?
I don't want to get into that because our history is of no consequence. The past and the future of no consequence. I'm only ever going to speak to the geometry of now, because the geometry of now is the only place or location wherein you can actualize. And in that state of actualization, you move beyond the thrall of time, which is the very definition of fiction and fictitious thought. So we're talking about how to move beyond fiction and false light. And the answer is by actualizing in the now and by not referencing the past or the future ever. And that's in that state of immanent grace. That incidentally is the return to the Garden of Eden, because the Garden of Eden only understands immanence and immortality and eternal bliss and euphoria, creative expansion and affirmation. So we want to reclaim that state of being, but we are trying to intellectualize our way toward an understanding of that state of being by talking about the very things that prevent us understanding that state of being. So that's the conundrum here. And I'm suggesting let's not consistently circle jerk, not you and me, but life, people. Let's not circle jerk and consistently put ourselves into that revolving door of bullshittery. Let's just look at right here, right now, as being the crucible of the immanent flame of immortal bliss. And then let in that state of grace, in that state of, let's say, eternal witness, why do we not simply envision the highest outcome or the highest manifestation of now in the now? And that to me is why the elevation of art, beauty, and consciousness becomes the thing that we ought to consistently keep in our mind's eye, not the metrics or the blueprints or the past and future templates, but just right here, right now. What I've learned is the following, and I'll only speak to what I've learned, is that I have limitless access to the so-called Akashic record. I have limitless access to the so-called universal mind, which is bliss. and euphoria. I personally have tapped into that. I do not suggest for one moment that I'm in a state of grace or a state of bliss permanently, but I can tell you I have absolutely tapped into it, and I've learned how to consistently retrain myself back into that quantum void. And to my credit, I have been consistent in what I've been saying for many, 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 many years, which is more or less the same metric. Be here now, and elevate one's own state of being and doing, and then ultimately ensure that one's being, which is the vertical axis, and one's doing, which is the horizontal axis, become the living cross. The being here now and the doing right action. So pure truth, right action in the living moment is the path of least resistance to the highest outcome, always and always. That was my 40 years of being an honest and a good human, and a deeply one that feels very deeply. That's what I arrived at. I arrived at that as the living gospel from all the scriptures and the dogma and the gospels that I looked into, and studying everything from the fucking Hindu epics to the Zohar, and having interest in all of these different mystical traditions. I arrived simply at that pure truth and right action in the living moment, which is the now, the infinite now, is always the path of least resistance to the highest outcome. And one thing I know about humans is that we're all ultimately seeking the highest outcome. That for sure I know about my brothers and sisters, which is why I love human beings, despite themselves, despite their generic character and nature. There is a sweetness to humans, to Adamites. And I believe that it is that foundational sweetness, common decency and kindness that is the frequency of Terra, of Tara, of this entire earth. The crystalline guts of this earth beams that frequency into the galaxy and into the universe. And it is my I'm not going to say understanding, but I'm going to say it's my knowing that it is that frequency, which is empathy, is empathic, which is the most shareable wave in terms of physics that we can identify. But that shareable wave of empathy that is bursting, radiating off this plane of existence, this Tara, this Terra, this earth, into the void, that is the thing that is of such immense significance and importance to all galactic intelligence, which is why the Pentagon files have opened up, and now everyone's talking about UFOs and ETs, because that big collective event is now happening. It's about to happen. Certainly between now and 2027, 28, we're going to see full spectrum collective first contact with our so-called sky brothers and sisters. And that event horizon really would perfectly define the replete end of time as we understand it, and of history, and of thought, and of ideation. And we'll enter at that point, or my understanding is it's 2032, my understanding. You see, even that word, I've got to keep policing the words, as we all do. But 2032, it's my knowing, based on fairly high authority, that is the year that we move into the galactic brotherhood or fraternity or federation, however you want to coin that event horizon. That's almost certainly happening by that time. I would have thought it would be happening sooner, by 2030, but I have it on very good authority now, a higher authority than my own intuition, that it's 2032.
Yeah, awesome. Well, that sounds so positive. I love that, because I find that on my own journey, really, you seek too much information and not enough transformation, I think, is the meme. And there's so much information out there, but I suppose my studies of numerology, astrology, symbology, all these kind of decoding the nature of existence, I think it obviously it serves you extremely well. But as you say, it ultimately then boils down to exactly that, isn't it? You kind of just be a good human, be in the moment, follow your highest excitement in art, in creativity, etc. Which is why they're so hell bent on keeping us in these lower frequencies and eating toxic food and spraying toxic, this kind of toxicity to keep us in these lower bandwidths, so to speak, so that we kind of aren't breaking out. But it's up
Can
to
I
us.
stop? Can I stop you there? I'd really appreciate if you'd let me just jump in, because
Yeah.
uh, what I want to say to what you've said is that you're entirely correct and entirely accurate. But the higher, again, truth is something, pure truth folds within itself. And to get to the atom seed of truth, which is the quintessence, the purest definition of truth, is that which self-exists, self-reveals, and self-fulfills in immanence, in a state of infinite grace. And the truth of the, or the pure truth of the matter, is that they are only and can only ever be the unresolved aspects of you and me. And that's in that truism, which also took me an inordinate amount of time, many years to alchemize that. Yeah, that they can only ever be the unresolved aspect of you and me. It's a very important mantra, that, and one that when we really own that, it can elevate our consciousness enormously, because it immediately takes us outside of the dialectic. It removes us vertically out of the shit show, out of the dialectic, the revolving door, the checkerboard of the kingdom of the devil, which is
Yeah.
always frustrating to be on. And it's frustrating because the checkerboard of the kingdom of the devil defines and describes the dance of night and day, which is to say the adherence to time, which is to say entropy and death. And if we are serious about that bit of the return to the Garden of Eden, that is a return to immanence, which is a return to immortality. And the only way we can do that is by transmuting and transcending thought altogether and entering into the living principle of things, and not the gospel, not the words, not the verbiage. Because we do get caught up in the words, and we do end up on this revolving door and on the dancing on the checkerboard. But the fact of the matter remains, in a state of grace, we move absolutely outside of that dialectic. We're being poisoned, yes, but we are the ones permissioning ourselves being poisoned. And we are filling out the forms, as you know, as a lawyer, and as also somebody who understands the metric of so-called sovereignty. You will know, of course, that we are the ones who are circumscribing the prison cell for ourselves. We are the ones who are permissioning our own indentureship. We are the ones permitting the banks and the governments to discharge monies against our treasury bills, against our birth bonds, because we are consistently filling out the fucking forms with our block black capital letter straw man name. And we're never claiming that straw man. We're never entering into true grace or true courage, because it's easier for us to be digital warriors. It's easier for us to throw stones at the citadel. It's easier for us to wait until we see our neighbor moving on the front foot and picking up the stick. And then once it is safe enough, we tell ourselves, we'll do it. We'll be in the front of the war. No, you're chicken shit is what you are. And I'm talking to 99.9% of my beloved brothers and sisters. You are chicken shit, because you consistently hide behind the armchair. That's the truth of the matter. You hide behind your little freedom mouse, as Dr. Rima Leibar calls it, and you hide behind your own fiction. So you are no worse, no better, forgive me, than the fictitious police or public officials or bureaucrats themselves, fetid little turds of humans who are hiding behind the badge of office or the seal of office, So again, reckoning. It's about a reckoning. And to enter into the flame of pure truth is to burn off that ego form and that hubris, and to reckon with oneself. I'm participating in that fiction. And I am the one permitting it. The they can only ever be an unresolved aspect of you and me. So once I have fully resolved the shadow within self, and I have no longer eclipsing truth because it's comfortable to eclipse the truth until it's no longer comfortable. Once I stop that kind of fuzzy logic with myself, now I'm qualifying as a Christed being. Now I'm beginning to qualify to enter the flame of pure truth and become the alchemist. So again, hard logic, but we have to do that reckoning, and we can't consistently talk about them and us as though they are separate from us, because they're not.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I totally agree with that. And obviously, doing the work that I do, we are working and have access to trusts at Citibank. I won't say too much about it on here, but it's something to
Very
kind of come and
good.
check it.
I'd love to have a private
So
conversation with you on that. Very
yeah,
good.
I won't go too much into that, but we do it very much in the private, but to remove ourselves from this usufruct, which basically, we sign it over. We sin. We sin on the dotted line. There's a sine wave of time again, and we, people think that the Great Reset is just financial, but we know that it's spiritual in the main. And like you said, we've got to kind of lead that charge and lead that way. And it's not what we say, it's what we do. And if we're not doing it, and we're just being a bit of a keyboard warrior, then we've got to kind of take this back. We've got to kind of understand, I suppose, how the system operates, but also that we are beneficiaries, that we are the creators, that these dead fictional corporate dead dead speak entities, they need us, we don't need them. And
Yeah,
to kind of
yeah,
observe
yeah.
that and be the observer of it, but also to action it and turn that around.
So, you have to ask the average middle Englander, the one that still, buys the coronation mug. You have to ask them, like, what mind virus are you suffering from when you still look at the flickering screen of the BBC? Now, we all know how evil the BBC is. We all know it's a pedophilic, satanic organization, the most disgusting institution in media anywhere in the world. BBC tells itself, and people of Middle England like to think that the BBC is the hallmark and the gold standard in probity, veracity, and integrity in broadcasting. No, it fucking isn't. It's a fetid, venal institution. It is satanic in extreme, and it does nothing but protect deceptions and deceit and high crimes and treason, and perpetuate high crimes and treason against the good, idiot tax-paying people of Middle England. I'm speaking now specifically to the British, of course. But I want to ask the Middle Englander, what sickness do you suffer from? What are you assailed by in your mind? What mind virus has got hold of you that you genuinely enjoy the spectacle of King Charles now loping along and sitting on the throne, or glad handing people at Buckingham Palace, or being on the world stage in any way, shape, or form? What sickness has seized you that you believe that to be right and proper and decent and equitable and just? All of it is criminal. It's literally
Yeah.
criminal in the true sense of the word criminal. So you've got the Crown of England. And no disrespect to Charles, the living man. I genuinely think he's lovely. I genuinely think that Camilla is lovely as well. I genuinely think all of these characters are likely to be quite lovely as human beings. Genuinely, I've no acrimony in my heart to them. But there's a huge distinction, a gulf of distinction between Charles, the living man, and Prince Charles or King Charles, who's now entered into the realm of fiction. I mean, for God's sake, this is like a stranger off the street to you, who's assumed this ermine mantle and is now the comptroller of this, $1 trillion orgiastic Babylonian fortune, which is itself built on the blood and bones and sweat and tears and execution and war fodder misery of millions and millions and millions and millions of souls. It is what it is. It's satanic. It's devilish. I mean, every single gilded bauble in Windsor Castle and in Buckingham Palace should be smelted down. Every single stolen artifact, starting with the newer stone from the crown, should be returned to India, and all of the artifacts returned to Egypt and to Algeria and the Sudan and all the countries that the British Museum and the Royal Geological Society and all these expeditionary institutions stole and hacked out of the dying fingers of black skin, brown skin, red skin, yellow skin people all around the world. That's the truth of the matter. The citadel should be reduced to ashes, and your ideas of history, people, should be incinerated as well. So you like to think, oh, but it's a disgrace. He's saying burn all the books. Too fucking right, I'm saying burn all the books, because they're goddamn spells and bonds. There is nothing of integrity, probity, or veracity in any of the books. None whatsoever. You could start, incidentally, with the coronation oath, itself the gravest lie in British law. So where do you want this to end? If we're serious about a return to the Garden of Eden, if we're serious about extending our lives into the immanent flame of immortality, which is a choice, incidentally, if we're serious about ascension, if we're serious about any of these ultimate ideals and goals of salvation, then why don't we start in the here and now with a bittersweet reckoning of truth? History is a godless fiction, a lie in any event. All the shit in the British Museum is theft, pure theft, and blood theft at that. All of it should be returned to from whence it was stolen. And we should deconstruct the entirety of the British establishment, starting with the crown and all of its stolen baubles. Whitehall, the entire civil service should be eviscerated, annihilated, all of it. The justice system in the United Kingdom, arguably the most evil justice system anywhere on earth, because those motherfuckers are the ones that set the source code for the rest of the world. The bar associations, Lincoln's Inn, and all that bullshit. I've played around on that playground, and so on and so on and so on. And let me just say in closing on my little rant and tirade against the crown and against the establishment, all of which should be eviscerated, should be annihilated, and incidentally will be eviscerated and will be annihilated, because there is no choice. Ultimately, we have to zero it out, because it was the onset of the great fiction. You could only say that behind the British crown stands the black papacy, the superior general, the Jesuitical element of the heinous Roman Catholic Church, itself predicated on bloodlust and deceptions. So that's the only higher criminal element, is the Vatican behind the British crown. But the British crown really was the one that set the pace for all the imperial crowns of Europe to go and murder with impunity all the First Nation peoples and set into motion the terminal, sociopathic, genocidal tidal wave of doom, which lasted 500 years. Well, it certainly kicked off 500 years ago, and it's roundabout now reaching its nadir point. But the only way we can alchemize, transmute it, and transcend the thrall that Cronus, the crown, the state, has cast upon this world is if an act of collective consciousness demanifests it, dematerializes it through empathy, through love, through pure understanding of pure truth as it relates to history and culture. And because most Middle Englanders are going, oh God, no, you can't do that. The British Museum is a wonderful thing. The British Library is a wonderful thing. No, none of them are lovely. None of them are wonderful. They're all the grand deception. They are what are preventing us returning to the Garden of Eden. So at the end of the day, get over yourself, Granny, whoever you are in Middle England with your tea and scones, thinking that we should at least hang on to, the idea of the royal house, because, even if we strip it down a little bit, no, eradicate it. Get Charles off, put him on a pension, put him in his bungalow, let him walk free. Absolutely. But the
Yeah.
crime, the high crimes and treason that God love him, he was born and birthrighted into, is incalculable. It's incalculable. To this very day, you can literally calculate the deaths happening. People are being butchered and murdered as a direct result of the fiction of the King of England still sustaining in the mind's eye of the good, stupid people of Middle England. That's the real spellbinding that's going on. People are dying. The Pirbright institution, these kinetic, responsible for all of the most lethal pathogenic viral strains of COVID and going back, God knows how many generations, have all been unleashed essentially through the thrall of the British Crown. The engineering and the deceptions of history and the complete desecration of our true knowledge of who and what we are was incubated through the British Crown. So you see, there are high crimes. The poisoning that's happening right now in Mozambique of babies using the baby food, the processed sugars and all of that stuff. That's all the issue of the British Crown. The mind fuckery in the schoolrooms all around the world, subsequent to the 1952 British curriculum invasion of our gestalt, that's causing unbelievable pandemonium and disease and death. So you see that if you are alive and if you're awake in here, you can see the truth. Pure truth is about reckoning. It's being okay with the reckoning as well. It's ghastly. It's an apocalypse, but you can sustain through it, and you must sustain through it. I'm just inviting this audience, your audience, who are clearly more emancipated than most people, no question about that, if they are paying attention to sovereignty and to, reclamation of the straw man and activation of consciousness. I'm saying let's go all the way, baby, because we're out of time.
Yeah. And it's so interesting. That was the best speech ever. I was enthralled. It was absolutely beautiful because it's just banged on, isn't it? And I think it goes back to what you were saying earlier about empathy and having that higher frequency. We can empathize, we can have compassion. We've got to kind of keep in those higher states. And even talking about the coronation, it is about that awareness that Prince Charles and his mother before him, and her father before him, they go through this coronation. That it's actually called the Arcana of time. They are holders of time, and they know that energy condensed to a slow vibration is condensed by time. So that's what that ritual is about. But what a lot of people don't know is 3 days later they defect and they take up what's called the chair of pagan estates, and this idea of Baal worship. Ultimately, that's what it becomes, and they become this corporate entity. The queen lying in state. Well, a state is a contract, and just what I try and do is just try and break down these words, this double speak, this all these double meanings, and it starts to go. We know the obvious one, like government means mind control, literally from the Latin governare and the mens, to control the mind. But even house, lord in Hebrew means Baal. So the House of
Right.
Lords is the House of Baal. And just to kind of, it's just to show this fiction, just to highlight it, to put light on it. But like say, it all boils down not just about kind of pulling back that curtain and revealing the little guy behind the curtain in the Wizard of Oz. It's just some dude pulling the strings, and he's not almighty and he's not all powerful, and no one's coming to save us. These kind of victim templates that we've got, or these savior templates, but that we have to take right action as well, and we have to kind of put our foot on the throttle and get shit done, I suppose. And that's certainly where my heart is at. um so I guess one of the questions I also wanted to ask you, so you've got this wealth of actual experience and these amazing contacts, and you've been at this work a very long time. I saw an interview where you were talking about alien bases, and I think this is going to be a huge thing that people, as you say, need to kind of get ready for and wake up to. I also saw you make a statement once on an interview. You said, "God is an alien, get over it," and it really tickled me.
Yeah. Yeah. I
What
mean,
was yeah?
that's
Talk
all
to us a
part
bit.
of that's all part of the emancipation. That's all part of the
Yeah,
resurrection and the reclamation of our sovereign status as sons and daughters of God is we are forced into really opening our eyes and, in a sense, even sticking matchsticks in there to ensure that they don't blink whilst we move through this extraordinary end of days. End of days being DAZE, end of days, end of time, end of days, end of the dream spell, and moving now into cogitation, into this emancipated state of witness, of the majesty of life, the majesty of creation, the majesty of truth as it emerges through revelation. And a big part of it, if not the biggest part for most people, is going to be the reckoning that that we are a galactic hybrid, born essentially spawned through petri dishes by galactic intelligences over billions and billions of years, over 950 billion years, if we want to get into the true timeline, so-called timeline. But the reckoning that that we are a galactic hybrid is the key piece here. I have no issue with that, and most of the people I deal with don't have an issue with that. Psycho-spiritually, they are mature enough to be okay with the truth, whatever it is, whatever it is. But there's an even greater truth than that, which is that the Adamite, the realized human, the superluminal human, as I refer to the human that is emerging, the superluminal Adamite is the most extraordinary creature in the cosmos, in the universe, without any question of doubt. We have all the God code in us. Our junk DNA has got immanent majesty beyond any realm of imagination or reckoning. And that's going to be activating exponentially, incrementally, exponentially in the I don't want to say days ahead, I don't want to say time ahead, but as this unfoldment occurs, we're going to see ever greater dimensions of expression emerge through the fractal DNA that's encoded in the human. And it's limitless. The ecstasy that we're likely to witness and experience is utterly limitless. Where we then choose to take the journey, once we've fulfilled this massive Kali Yuga, this massive time cycle, and enter into the superluminal ascension event, which by my reckoning occurs in the year 2046 as we understand the calendric system now. And if that changes, I'll speak very loudly to the change. But at this stage, it is my understanding, it is my knowing, it is my reckoning that 2046 is the year of the vertical ascension. But it's almost irrelevant or moot to be speaking in those terms, because the journey toward 2046 is going to be so abundant and so prosperous and so euphoric in any event that we're not going to be aiming at an objective or a dateline. It's just that my understanding, again, we've got to come up with a better word. Let's try and work on one, Carly. But my understanding of time and of astrology and astronomy is such that the micronova event in 2046 becomes the seminal dateline for an eruption, a radiant explosion, so to speak, that would otherwise eviscerate this world and all worlds in this quadrant of the universe or the galaxy, but won't do because the Tesla shield, so to speak, will already have been activated. The collective morphogenetic upshift will have occurred by that time, if it's not already occurring right now, and that Tesla shield activation will stave off the destructive, any destructive probability. And that's the real dateline that we're dealing with ultimately. Prior to that, there are all sorts of, you talk about the military base or the alien base that I've been referring to lately. You're probably referring to the one in the Buceci Mountains just outside Romania. And yes, that's as real can be. And it's not just that; it's Alexander the Great's tomb and all the Ark of the Covenant being discovered in the Wadi Rum desert in Jordan, held by best accounts by under Delta military sequestration now. It's the pyramids that are being unearthed all around the world. In Bosnia, of course, the massive one there with Dr. Sami, but pyramids here, only 15 minutes from where I'm sitting right now, we've discovered the biggest pyramid in this part of Mexico, and are hoping very much to be at the forefront of the archaeological revelation of that. But something we've been tracking all year, this year. So we know the pyramids are revealing all around the world. That's also part of Revelation. But what are the pyramids? I was in Sudan fairly recently investigating the Nubian pyramids in the desert there. Those are pure technologies. What were they doing? And they're shaped like this, not like the ones in Egypt. What were those technologies? Hundreds of them in the middle of the desert in the Sudan. These are huge, bigger than the ones in Giza in Egypt, some of them. What are we dealing with? We're dealing with technologies. What are we dealing with with all of the classical Greco-Roman architecture that we're finding in cities all around the world? The revelation is showing us that these are invariably part of ancient civilizations that were not built in the 1800s by the Masons. So that correcting of history and corrected history as part of revelation, the mud floods that we know occurred, the evidence is everywhere. That's not something which has poked its face into any faculty in the university yet. But within 3 years, it'll force its way in. The pyramids is an essential piece, incidentally, and because the pyramid, going back to the relationship of this Earth with Saturn, there's a correlation and a correspondence there with this archetypal geometry and mathematics of the pyramids and pyramidology. But in any event, the point is that aliens are you and me. Aliens is and are Jehovah. Jehovah's a fucking alien, and not a very nice one either, I don't mind saying. So any religious zealots who are still mind-fucked by the idea that Jehovah is a benevolent God, well, you just need help. You need to really go and sit quietly with yourself and look around you. Look around at this world that your Jehovah has prevailed, has presided over. Your Jehovah has not done a great job. So we're forced into completely excising our relationship from God in the accepted sense. And we have to, in order to grow up, in order to evolve, we have to excise, surgically remove ourselves from this old idolatrous notion of what Jesus was, what God was, what Brahma was, what Vishnu was. All of them, all of these name, anything with a name is a fiction. Okay, end of. Anything that can be named is an idol, is a fiction, is a totem, is an idea. So we want to move beyond the realm of totems and ideas and symbols. We want to move into immanence, which is a direct relationship with so-called God. And God, the term, the word, is also a violation of what we believe godliness is. So move beyond the word God and move beyond the idea of God into full conjugation and covenant with your own standing as a true son or daughter of God. Technically, we should move beyond that and speak about ourselves as the gods, because there is no separation. There never was. That was the greatest lie of all. But people don't like to hear when you say, the alien that you fear is the God that you revere. But it's the truth of the matter,
Yeah.
Get over it.
And get over it, yeah. Absolutely. And with Christmas coming up, I've had these discussions a lot. I said, unfortunately, if you are a Christian, Ian is an annuity, it's a tax system, it's a Roman satanic system. If you're queuing up to drink of the blood and eat of the flesh and chant, all power to you, but you are in a huge ritual. You are giving your energy and your power over to these entities,
Yeah.
to whoever
Well,
they are,
call them elemental clouds, because that's exactly what they are. I refer to them as elemental cloud intelligences or egregores, which is what they are. They are a parasite. They're the ultimate parasite, actually. They are the creature that emerges as a kind of morphogenetic cloud, an elemental cloud in the lower climes of the astral or the ethers, and it accretes and becomes, in a sense, a living creature with a kind of intelligence, because it is all of the unutilized godliness and intelligence and light and plasma that we put off, we abnegate or abdicate. So billions and billions of souls abnegating and abdicating their divine light and their pure creation energy, moving that into this cloud. That cloud accretes and ultimately becomes a thing of its own. And that thing feeds back as a feedback loop into the temporal realm because its permissions are granted. Because the unresolved aspect of you and me is inviting it to take domination or dominion over us, to show us what to do, because we're not divining that journey for ourselves. We are abnegating it and asking, why me, O Lord, or lead me, or O Lord. And so the universe only does one thing ever, and that is lean in and ask you how you want to play. And you continuously abnegate and abdicate. The universe, in that sense, will morph into the very effigy, the totem, the behemoth, the leviathan that you believe. So if you are an unworthy and you believe in it, you will ultimately manifest a jealous, angry God that punishes the fuck out of you and will throw you into purgatory for infinity. So we manifest all of that. And it's now time to wear childish things. Simple as.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I, I I think with this kind of, especially in the truther movement, and I can't stand that term either. And it goes back again to what you were saying about empathy and these high frequencies. And what I've found is everyone's squabbling and actually beginning to attack each other. And that's why I've just completely moved away from that, because we're not doing what we're saying on the tin. Like I'm perplexed as to how people are missing the point here. We're supposed to be, raising each other up. Do you think that, like you were saying about about frequency as we know it, as a collective frequency? I watched a really good video where it was saying, I suppose I'm asking, do you think everybody will kind of, like in a quantum monkey kind of way, there will be an awakening to it, and that everyone will kind of get it, as in the sense that the quality of, say, your frequency, this video was saying it wasn't just about what your frequency is, but the quality of it in that quantum monkey sense will then kind of ricochet and create that great awakening, again, for want of probably a better phrase.
Well, it's already happened. So
Yeah.
again, it happened in 1987 on the 16th of August. That was the harmonic convergence. That was when the greatest amongst us, the soothsayers, the viziers, the oracles, the shaman, the medicine men and women, the so-called witches, the good ones of this world, of the First Nations, emphasis the First Nation peoples, but all around the world, the First Nation peoples on that fateful day were aware of the fact that we had come of age finally, and there was a morphogenetic upshift that occurred on that very day. So the 16th of August, 1987, in that sense, becomes the nexus point between the fallen light of Atlantis and the emergence of the vibral light, the so-called dawning of the age of Aquarius. And curious we're having this conversation because in the next few weeks, we move into, again, another extraordinary upshift. By start of April, by best accounts, we move into the next monumental upshift. And when we finally, the planetary cogitation is that we have arrived and that we've thrown the devil off our back. So some people who are triple vaxxed, boosted, and swilling Kool-Aid still, God knows how they've survived this far, but that echelon, I won't call it echelon, that demographic of human are likely to be moving into 2024 with a sense of profound fear, trepidation, and doom. But those who have already done the work, in a sense, and have already raised their own frequency out of fear and constriction and into this empathic form, this shareable wave form, are going to find the journey post-April 2024 as being just pure unfoldment of higher destiny. And then we move into 2025, midpoint 2025, seminal dateline in my reckoning. And as we move beyond that, we start then to see a world that we hitherto did not believe possible. We certainly, none of us ever imagined we would be in a world that we will see in late 2025. And that's just around the corner. I mean, that's just 18 months away, more or less 18 and a half months away. So it's happening right here, right now. But, I ask you and your audience, look back over your shoulder, which I don't oftentimes suggest people do, incidentally. But looking back at so-called COVID, late 2020, 2019, start of 2020, January of 2020, what were you thinking? What were you feeling? Go back and remember end of 19 into 20, and then see how vastly changed the world is. Completely transformed in so many ways. And now, of course, we have the horror of people dying exponentially. 7,000% increase in many sectors, in death and disease, galloping, turbo cancers, myocarditis, and every other affliction you can name. So, which of course pundits like myself were screaming about 3 years ago, warning about, screaming about 2 years ago, screaming about a year ago, screaming about. I've stopped screaming. Last year, this time, my narrative had changed, and I was saying, don't bother with the triage anymore. Don't bother to go back to the back of the queue and pick up the wounded. Don't bother. You're wasting God-given energy. You have to triage and keep pushing through. If we keep stopping and going to the back of the queue to redeem the irredeemables, the stupid humans amongst us who are the very enablers of the satanic status quo and are still too fucking stupid and steeped in hubris and ugliness of mind that they still can't admit that they got it so wrong, and that they put their children, their grandchildren, or their grandparents on the pyre because of their intellectual hubris, because they believe that they're a doctor or a nurse and they know best. Fuck you, all of them. So much of that devilishness happened, with families and in professions. Good humans have prevailed. And not only have we prevailed, the meek, we inherit the earth intact, with our bodies intact, more or less, our mRNA more or less intact. There is a transfection issue, believe me, but more or less we're intact. And I believe that a year ago, we should stop the triage. It wasn't serving. And now I've come to a point where I'm no longer angry and I'm no longer pushing on the front lines. I've really arrived at a point like we did what was needful. We did push through. We've arrived on dry shore, so to speak. And now, in my view, our duty of care as vision keepers, as truth sayers, is to now envision, embody, enact, and manifest the kingdom of heaven on earth in record time. Because now we're about to enter into this incredible quantum acceleration, which is connected to the geometry of light, incidentally, and how the hyperdimensional spheres are now confluencing with this so-called 3D temporal sphere. And the hyperdimensional physics has altered sufficient. And that's also connected to the codifications within human, the Christic human blood as well, and our so-called DNA, mRNA. So there's a whole new language activating that we have to tap into, provided we are in a state of grace sufficient to enter that field of consciousness, which is why we must stop focusing on the Israel-Palestine dialectic, the up, down, left, right, black, white, sun, moon, Shiva, Shakti dialectic. Whilst the satanic, Sabbatean, Luciferic, Fabianist forces on earth have engineered a lot of confusion in the hemispheres,
Yeah.
and they've done it deliberately. In our schooling, we're seeing it, and we're seeing it in how kids are taught about gender identity and all the rest of it. There's a lot of malevolent orchestration and engineering trying to move the cup here and the cup there. And when you're young and pretty dumb, you can be easily impressed and confused. So we all know what I'm talking about. A lot of this gender assignment stuff is a very important subject for me, because it perfectly illustrates how diabolical the satanic mind is when it towed into our kindergartens and into our primary schools and started to mindfuck kids whilst parents were hard earning and paying their taxes and out there breadwinning, and they mindfuck kids very quickly, and then with gaming and Disney and all sorts of other impressions managed to tear this generation off the tit of its parents and out of the psycho-intellectual custody of its parents. That's been a terrifying thing to witness and to behold. And how many of those kids have now committed suicide, and how many of those kids are living in abject misery, and the confusion is ever more horrific and the sufferance ever more horrific for them. So that's what I'm talking about the muddying of the hemispheres is part of the Babylonian language of helter-skelter. So the satanic forces did that deliberately. So your average educator is just a moron, knows nothing what they're doing. They just follow the code book, whatever they're told to do. The average teacher in the average school is just a moron, also just trying to pay the mortgage. But actualized thinking, to actually see truth, from fiction, pure truth from truth, that becomes a real craft, a real art form. In any event, I'm rambling on now, but yeah,
No,
interesting
not at all.
topic.
And I think, like you say, I have this theory called 42, which is carbon, which is matter, but it's the answer to the meaning of life, the universe, and everything. And because people haven't asked the question, they're not going to understand the answer. They haven't created that neural pathway. So it is the question that drives us. But these people haven't had that ability to critically think, and they've just been mind fucked out of, like you say, to literally send people into schools and try and give a 5-year-old sex changes is just like beyond diabolical. It's just absolute insanity. And I always say, it's the kingdom is within. And it is us, and the only limitations we have on ourselves is our own minds. It's the firmament. Firm is stubborn, and ament means idiot. And people have just become these stubborn idiots. And for those that have eyes to see, and for those that have ears to hear, isn't it? So but like you say, exactly, I did that. I was out there, I was battling, and I think it becomes that time where the warrior knows when to rest, and we're creating the new. And as you say, such a positive message to end on. And I've always said to people, when people perhaps, and we all have moments of it where we perhaps have those moments of fear, but there's so much happening that we can't even be aware of. But just to try and tune into that, to tune into those frequencies, and to maintain that, and we'll get there as that collective. It's a beautiful thing. But thank
Indeed,
you so
indeed.
much for joining us. I don't want to take up too much of your time, because I know
Thank
what a
you.
busy man you are. It's been illuminating, to say the least. It's been absolutely amazing. Thank you so
I'd
much.
love to have a private conversation if you could get to Miriam your contacts. I'd like to discuss a bit more
Yes.
and find out from you what's going on the ground in the UK in terms of reclamation, sovereignty, strawman, all of that. I'd love to have a conversation with you on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That'd be an absolute honor and pleasure. Thank you again so much, Sacha.
Love. Bye-bye.